Please welcome back Guy Maddin and Evan Johnson.
Gosh, thanks.
So, I'll start with a couple of questions. I know you've talked about this a lot, but I feel like we have to get into it just because the genesis of this film is a little unusual.
Yeah.
And this is part of, it started as a multimedia project and will eventually exist online as well. So Can you talk a little bit about the Séances project that started it all?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. There are a bunch of, this project started exclusively as an internet project, interactive to a degree, in which anyone, which used as its source material we shot movie adaptations of movies that once were and no longer are, movies from many countries, from all over the place, that are now lost, or in some ways or otherwise unrealized in ways that feel like a loss. We shot in public places, two public spaces, the Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris. We shot for 3 weeks, 18 days, one movie adaptation per day, a story that was inspired by or based on a lost film, and another 3 weeks in Montreal. And the idea was to upload all these movies and fragment them into little pieces onto a website called Séances, which is the co-creation of mine and Evan's. And anyone online visiting this site can hold a séance with lost cinema, and where the spirits, these fragmentary spirits, would interrupt each other in a kind of a paranormal séances you're used to seeing in old movies, and create a one-of-a-kind combination, a collision of non sequitur collisions of movie fragments to create a one-of-a-kind combination with a one-time only name. It produces the computer program, which we're just finishing up now. It'll be up in the spring of 2016 or late winter. It produced its first randomly generated title, Wise Trumpets of the Milky Midnight. We watched the randomly generated movie, which had some intriguing non sequitur collisions, some not so concluding, not so interesting. And then the program took that movie that it created out of lost source material and then lost it again. The program not only creates movies, but loses them. And but making these, this is new media, interactive, and the Canadian government is very generous in supporting artists. And they're really eager to support new media, but just the ceilings for new media are low, and we realized we would have to make a companion piece to the website, a feature film. And we also realized by the time 4 years had passed working on this internet project that would be 4 years that had gone by without us making a feature. So we decided to make a feature as well, The Forbidden Room, which is a combination, almost non sequitur collisions, but more precisely assembled. And so these two offspring of ours, which we love equally, the Séances project and The Forbidden Room, are the result. But the internet project came first.
Can you talk a little bit about finding the structure for the feature,
Sure.
which is this sort of, nested narratives and stories within flashbacks, within dreams, and how I think one of the things that's most exciting about watching the film is how it connects with one of its themes of amnesia, and how you're constantly forgetting where you are in the film, and then constantly being reminded and remembering as you emerge from one narrative back to its framing narrative, and etc.
Go ahead.
Yeah, amnesia is a convenient plot device, for one thing, because when you start a story from the beginning, nothing's happened before it, so you can't remember, you don't know what your characters have done, so it's kind of convenient for your characters to not know what they've done.
It's
either.
like it's not just the characters, but the viewers have a kind
And
of
nobody knows
amnesia, yeah.
where you're
The
coming
world has
from.
just
So
started, yeah.
amnesia just feels like a metaphor for the beginning of a film in some way. But the nesting structure was, I know Guy and I had different inspirations, maybe slightly. You love a John Brahm film with Robert Mitchum called The Locket, which I'll let
Yes.
you describe in a moment.
Sure.
You like this author too, but I in particular was obsessed with Raymond Roussel, who's a French proto-surrealist, sort of, who wrote really extravagantly complex, nested narratives that kind of defy interpretation and defy any logic. They don't seem to have a purpose. They don't seem to go anywhere, and we were kind of intrigued by a journey into narrative where you don't end up anywhere, where there's a sort of disturbing emptiness in the middle. But then we also we were trying to make, you wanted to broaden your audience and make your most conventional film. And
Yes.
so we bought a screenwriting textbook and read some of it, and the back of it anyway, and worked hard, learned about that films have 3 acts, some of them, and we read all about that, anyway, we tried to combine this very complex nesting structure in which there are something like 6 stories in the first act, 8 in the second,
9, yeah.
8, 9
Yeah.
in the third. But we tried to combine that with the sort of conventional emotional rhythms of a film, so that we believe the film is very conventionally structured on a sort of musical, emotional level, even if the particulars of the stories involve a lot of digressions. There's a sort of this, like the psychosexual energy is conventional in
Yes.
its rhythms anyway, if not its particular fetishes. Anyway, but you talk about it now.
No, that seems to cover it. I've just always wanted, ever since seeing The Locket, which is just the story of a woman's 3 lovers, and you get the framing device where the most recent lover is getting married, then he's visited by another man who used to be married to her, and then he will tell the story of the encounter he had with a previous lover as well. Then you finally get to hear her story, and at the center of her story is a childhood trauma involving this tiny little vaginal locket, which contains a kind of a little trauma that seems to radiate out through all these lovers, and it's kind of perfect. And every one of the layers is really exciting, all inform each other, reinforce each other, which is completely different than this, I admit. But it did excite me, just all these going into the center of that movie as a viewer, and then coming out was especially pleasurable for some reason. Just pulling out is perfect. And so I think I wanted to, and I was familiar with Roussel as well and loved him. And John Ashbery, who wrote The Framing Device, How to Take a Bath, he learned French so he could read Raymond Roussel. Really loved him that much and has spent a lifetime championing him. It seemed to be, the stars were aligning and demanding that we invoke our version of the Raymond Roussel structure, and whether we understood it entirely or not. And then I really wanted to just see how many nested stories we could accumulate, so that the act of pulling out could be, the feeling of pulling out could be heightened as much as possible.
Could you both maybe say a little bit about this process of working with the lost films, which seems like something that I think is very consistent with your body of work, Guy? I mean, just, your films in some ways seem to me like a kind of secret history or imaginary history of cinema. And working with these lost films, I gather that in some cases you were just working with a title or a synopsis.
Yeah, often. Variety's been around reviewing movies and offering synopses since 1902 or 3. In other countries, it's not so easy researching things. But I discovered our first list of movies to adapt was, when we looked at it, it was a bunch of white male European emigres who'd worked in Hollywood and lost films. And we realized, okay, let's just do round 2 of research here. And that's when the world opened up to us, and we discovered so many different ways in which a movie can be lost, the reasons, political reasons, that fascinating recontextualizations that just how progressive eugenics was considered in the early teens in the films of Lois Weber, films that were lost because they weren't allowed to be made by marginalized people or for political reasons. The Soviet filmmakers under Stalin obviously had a lot of trouble. There were 70s Cambodian films where the filmmakers were murdered by the Khmer Rouge and their films destroyed. The great African-American filmmaker Oscar Micheaux, who really had a hard time making his films, and many other independent African-American filmmakers who made a bunch of films against long odds and then lost so many of them, and we lost them. All these fascinating historical contexts. There was Edward Chodorov, blacklisted, never got a chance to make this pet project of his, the lynching of Elizabeth Taylor, which, you know, sounds great. There were just so many fascinating titles that I began to really, I'd like to say I was haunted by this loss, and I was, but more so I was just feeling greedy that, hey, there's all these great narratives that are just free for the taking. And we just can recontextualize them and play with them and just go to town. So I was haunted and greedy at the same time.
I'll just ask one more before opening it up to the audience. I feel like I do need you, maybe Evan, you can talk about this, because I know you and your brother worked on the look of the film specifically, and there's something really interesting about how this film really embraces digital in a way. It's shot on digital, and the effects are digital, but obviously to recreate, like, you know, a kind of imaginary past cinema. Can you say a bit about, I don't know if you want to reveal your secrets, but what you...
Well, I won't do that, but
okay.
They're not very interesting, the secrets. The key, I think the key, we shot digitally because it was just simpler and easier in a lot of logistical ways.
And affordable, yeah.
Pardon me?
And affordable.
And affordable, yeah. But Guy didn't like the look of the raw digital footage, and so I promised him that I could fix it in post without having any knowledge of what post even meant. You know, it was like a cereal brand.
And I might add, you needed to promise me to just get me out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
I was so despairing at how uncharming the footage had looked.
So Galen, my brother, is the production designer and did a lot of the music. We started trying to make it look like film, and then started to feel maybe guilty that it, or is there something lame about doing that? I don't know. I guess just guilty. It felt like a dishonesty to make it just look like film. So we attempted to make it look like film and adjust the color and texture, and even the way the pixels are just attacked and mashed. We tried to reveal that we were doing digital things because it felt like a terrible ethical crime if we were to successfully convince anyone it was shot on film, that would be evil somehow. I don't know. Maybe I'm...
No, but I like the fact
guilt,
that the project, especially when you consider both halves together, one of them is on the internet with one foot firmly in the digital realm, and the other, and all of this, almost all the source material comes from the film world, the long-lost emulsions. We were going to include some shows from the lost Dumont television network, so there would have been some cathode hauntings as well, but and some other lost material as well. But
yeah, so in the end, it was just a technique to learn about the ways that film degrades and burns and melts and gets dirty, and try to think of ways that we could recreate that in the ways that the digital images might degrade, and then combine them in some kind of organic whole, and that's what we tried to do.
All right, we'll take questions from the audience, although it is very dark out there. Hands?
there's some people stretching
I can't see any.
back there.
Okay, I really cannot
Okay.
see. It's kind of like a seance.
Maybe just
actually.
shout it out, I guess, then. Question.
Actually, if the projection booth is listening, can we have some lights in the theater?
Okay, let her rip. Not entirely, sorry. It's something about, there's some petite brunettes somewhere. and we're feeding back, too.
Yeah, I'm wondering if the women in the film blur together a lot. And
If they blur
I'm wondering if that's because of the characters origins, or
Okay, I'm going to try to paraphrase. Question about the women in the film sort of blurring together and whether that had something to do with their origins in silent film.
Sort of.
Okay.
It may have, some of that is that several characters are played by the same actress.
So it may
Well,
well have
that's-
been the same person.
Yeah, and that was, yeah, but that was, and that much of it was deliberate, that we were trying to produce continuity somehow. Like this is better. A series of, I hope you can't even hear me. A series of sort of ludicrous, desperate, pathetic men clawing after the same woman. But part of that is we're men, and we're writing scripts that were, mostly based on melodramatic conventions that emerged in the teens when gender politics were different. They're worse in some ways, but I'm not saying it's a utopia today or anything. And we were just, I don't know, the writing process involved just a lot of letting out of our horrible brains, and which is probably why the energy of the movement of the protagonists tends to be male, I guess. It's something we're not particularly proud of necessarily, but was honest, at least for us. I don't know if you have, but I'm just the co-director, so this is on you.
Well, there's something in the writing that just, I don't really direct the actors much. They just default to the performances here, and a lot of that might remind you of silent movie, disinhibited performances. We write melodramas with the idea that there's no shame in melodrama, that melodramas can always represent the truth as long as they uninhibit the truth rather than exaggerate the truth. So there's something in the way I direct that encourages a kind of, I don't even know the difference between uninhibiting and disinhibiting anyway, but the opening up and so a lot of the performers might remind you of each other, but it is true that Clara Fury played what passes for a leading lady in the movie by appearing in 4 different stories, and she just has slightly different makeup in each one, and so they would blend together since they're all her. But the men seem pretty persistent at helping women, insisting that they can help women. I don't know. I even saw an example of this the other night on the sidewalk. My girlfriend and I were watching from a restaurant a woman who was sick. She'd had too much to drink, and she just barfed on a sidewalk. And a nice-seeming man came and held her hand, and another man came and held her head back, and that was her hair back. And then maybe another woman came to see if she was okay. Then about 3 or 4 other men came by just to watch. And she was very attractive, and some of these guys were, putting in a pretty lame performance at being concerned. And there was just a kind of a circling around. It just seemed like something from the animal kingdom, almost. And then the whole thing was diffused somehow with a cab and this other woman getting in with her, and it went away. But it just sort of reminded me of the kind of the choreographies that just ended up in our scripts, where someone might help someone, but they end up just leaving the person they're trying to help much worse off in the first place. And that part I can definitely attest to being a pattern in my life. So anyway, so I don't know, it just, without being too glib about it, it just seemed like something that I finally identified and didn't like. And then the scripts are written with a lot of joyous self-loathing. So.
Okay. Yes. Question about the cast, the casting process, a mix of well-known actors and maybe less recognizable faces.
Yeah, half of all our material is shot in Paris, where we had a great casting agent. I went to Paris, having spent knowing for about a year I'd be going there, that we'd be going there, and I was just on Facebook friending actors that lived in Paris, sort of expecting this is where we'd have to go. And I'd asked my friend Udo Kier and Geraldine Chaplin, I know them, and Amira Kazar a little bit to come, and that we just flesh out the rest with people off the sidewalk. But we got lucky, and our French line producer got a great casting director who really knew the Parisian acting community really well, and he knew which actors, even stars, would be up for an adventure of acting in public at the Centre Pompidou, right in front of a crowd of people like you, just watching, eating and coughing and going to the bathroom, which is just over there, a very cruisy place, and I don't know, dropping food from above, from a balcony that you could watch from above, just sort of half-chewed baguettes, glossy with saliva landing amongst the set. It was wonderful. He knew who would accept, and so only one person that we asked turned us down. That was Frederick Wiseman, who was in Paris at the time, turned us down flat. But everyone else in Paris said yes, and so there were some real heroes of mine, people I'd been admiring for a long time and never dreamt they would come on stage. When we shot in Montreal, the province of Quebec has its own official language and its own star system as a result, and we got even bigger stars from the Quebec star system to come. Roy Dupuis, who plays Cesare, the sapling jack, and the woodsman on the boat, is an enormous star there. Karine Vanasse, all these other people. So it was the same thing. We had a great casting agent. I wouldn't have known how to approach these people. None of those Quebecois stars are on Facebook. Sophie Desmarais was on Facebook, and then I contacted her, and she got off Facebook, blocked me. So yeah, I know we were just very lucky with two really great, intuitive casting directors. I'd never had that experience before. I felt really lucky. Yeah.
Can you say a bit about what it was like to direct in public? Was there a kind of added performative aspect for you?
I had hoped that directing in public would make me be more of a showman. I had made two movies a little earlier, Brand Upon the Brain, which was presented, I think, right in this room at one point, with an 11-piece orchestra, three Foley artists, sound effects people, a narrator, Isabella Rossellini or Crispin Glover or John Ashbery, a singer, and all sorts of live elements. Then I narrated live as a travelogue, my Winnipeg, and I really felt like not just a filmmaker, but a showman as well. So I got to be a filmmaker and a showman while making those. And I thought, well, why not try to be a showman while actually making the movie? Maybe that would put some showmanship, which has always been lacking in my movies, right into the images as they're being recorded. I thought it would do that. I thought it would prevent me from walking through the motions on days where I felt down, because on these shoots, I knew we'd have to shoot a different movie each day, and starting over each day was this very Promethean nightmare, just rolling the same rock up the hill. And so it really did help to shoot in public, and kept everyone kept the sense of fun going, kept the pace going, I'll always remember my very first visit to a movie set. I was 23 years old, and I could not believe how slow and dull it was. And it was really thrilling to keep things moving for people.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the editing? There's so many different stories written, and it wasn't as jarring as one might think, there being so many different segments in the film. It seemed like I would guess a pretty intense process.
Do you want to answer this?
The question is about the editing and just like handling just the sheer number of stories.
Yeah, we hired an editor and everything. His name's John Gerdebeck, and he's kind of a genius, and that helped. You've worked with him for a long time.
I've been working with him since 2002.
2002. And I know we started editing the different stories in isolation, and as they came along, we started to piece them together in what would seem like logical ways, so that there would be some, so the audience might be able to follow things. But yeah, it took a long time. I don't know what else to say about it other than it took a long time.
Each story, every movie, every piece of fiction or documentary has its own kind of rhythm that is insisted by the story on the page or by its subject matter or whatever. So even if we wanted the movie to have the same frenetic pace all the way through, the stories would have resisted. So some of them are very laid back, some of them are a little bit more delirious, some of them are elliptical, and it's just what was on the page. And those things kind of, when you're cutting, that's just sort of determined for you. And we knew when we were ordering the movies into the order that you saw them tonight, in the 3-act, 3 basic Russian dolls standing there, and then an unsplooging of all the narrative with the Book of Climaxes. There was just kind of a pace that we were aware that each piece had, and we tried to keep that in mind while putting them together. That's all. We really wanted, unlike other feature films where you have a story that kind of one story that has its inner pace, and you try to keep that as tight as possible or as expansive as it seems to be insisting. This one, we were at cross purposes with ourselves because we wanted, by the end of the whole experience, everyone to feel ideally, we wanted everyone to feel like they'd just been washed up on some far shore, panting, having barely survived a near drowning in this big storm of narrative, And so there's such a thing as too much, and we wanted it to be too much, but not too much. And so it's kind of tricky because you're at odds with yourself. You want to make sure you can still keep your storm-tossed viewers alive just long enough to see the end credits. I don't know, it's a bit tricky. But thanks for asking.
We have time for a final question. Yeah, the very back.
Way in the back. Yeah.
Yes, were there any particular films that never were, or long lost films that you feel particularly strongly about as far as things that you might envision at some point either readapting or revisiting similar to the stories you mentioned with this film and Séances?
No, that was.
I guess the question is about other lost films.
Are there other lost ones that we didn't adapt? Is that what you mean?
Yes, there are ones that kind of stand out to you that either you didn't have an opportunity to.
Yeah, we were supposed to keep shooting for weeks and weeks and weeks in other public places, and the project just finally toppled beneath its own weight and the number of years that we were tired of spending on it. There was one in particular I like to think we could have done a great job on. It was a 1974 American sexploitation picture called Never the Twain. It was about a man possessed by the spirit of Mark Twain visiting the 1974 Miss Nude World pageant. And we've written a script for it, and we mashed it up with a lost Euripides play, which we just know is about a bunch of women slaughtering a bunch of men they can't stand. And then by coincidence, I'd contacted my friend, acquaintance, Michael Snow, the great Canadian experimental filmmaker, and asked him if he had ever had a lost film, and he said he'd lost 20 minutes of his amazing film, La Région Centrale, which is shot with a camera that just randomly shoots in every possible direction, a landscape. And so we just decided to consider that lost and just shoot our own adaptation of Never the Twain with this camera, just so that the Miss Nude World contestants murdering the men would only appear occasionally while the camera was just pointing elsewhere. It's really killing me that we didn't do that. So, yeah, thanks. I'm glad I got a chance to mention that.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Guy. And
Thank you,
Evan,
Dennis,
for being
and
here.
thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
all for coming.